Hello everyone, welcome to Fanfic Fridays. Today I'm going to be reading a short fanfic by the name of She's Wonderful by Skinlegs. Interesting name. Anyways, I'm going to have a link in the description about it. Without further ado, however, let's get started. At first, she was mortified. For a long while after, she was mortified. Lying in her bed that night, staring wide-eyed at the ceiling, she could still hear her pulse thrumming in her ears. As she lay there motionless, she could think only of how silly it was that she never considered it before. Ridiculous, even! She often caught her name whispered amongst her classmates, exchanged in hushed tones over school lunches and library books. All her friends knew of her. It seemed as if everyone in Paris had a story to tell. Of course, it was not Marinette they were talking about. So she had learned to tune it out. Out of costume, the word ladybug was still just a word to her, not a name, and it no longer grabbed her attention the way it had months before. She took no notice when her classmates talked about her, and she supposed that was why it never occurred to her that there was one person who never did so. It was Alia that posed the question, of course, in an attempt to make small talk. "What do you think of Ladybug?" she asked, thumbing her phone. "Ladybug?" Adrian repeated, surprised. Only when she heard that word on unfamiliar lips did she realize the gravity of the situation. A smile lit up his face. "I think she's wonderful," he continued after a beat. The two of them chattered away for a small eternity. Alia was thrilled, enthusiastically agreeing with everything he had to say, and there sat Marinette, heated blood drumming through her, focusing far too intensely on her shoes. From that point, she began to slip. It was difficult enough to perform basic tasks, for example, talking, when she felt that Adrian was watching her. Leaping over rooftops, outmaneuvering Akuma, spotting pitfalls in the most convoluted of supervillain designs. Out of the question. It was absurd, she thought, but Ladybug had never felt more like Marinette. Weeks passed before she found any merit in her discovery. While she was at home for lunch, her mother noticed her classmates being shuffled outside. She would come to find out that Akuma was in the process of tearing apart the school library, left unchecked while she was away. After being briefed on the situation by the nearest teacher, she turned to reassure the group of students standing behind her. Alia was pushed her way to the front, trusty phone aimed at Ladybug. Peering over her shoulder was Nino, and next to him was a wide-eyed Adrian Agreste. A quiet gasp stuttered past his parted lips when her gaze fell on him. For a moment, or perhaps a bit longer, the two of them stood suspended, neither daring to breathe. It was Alia's excited giggling that pulled her back down to earth. Embarrassed, she tore her gaze away and, after a quick sweeping glance over the crowd in front of her, hurried into the school. Neither she nor Chat Noir, who arrived shortly thereafter, were at their peak performance. For whatever reason, he, too, seemed distracted. Nevertheless, with their teamwork, the threat was quickly subdued. The sooner the better, she thought. Even before her earrings had begun to beep, she was out through the nearest window. She hoped to look for Adrian, but when she returned with the good news, he was nowhere to be found. Night soon fell over Paris, and once again she found herself lying in bed, unable to sleep. Memories of that afternoon danced about in her head. The mesmerized look in Adrian's eyes, the breeze toying with his hair as the rest of him stood stock still, save for the little twitch of his lips when he gasped. In the quiet of her bedroom she could still hear that soft intake of breath. It made something in her chest quiver and sputter, sending giggles bubbling up into her throat. She rolled onto her belly and pressed her face into her pillows to stifle her giddy laughter. Beside her, Tiki joined in. The next time they met, it was not entirely an accident. Adrian seemed down that day. Something about his father, she learned. Alia's blossoming relationship with Nino proved an excellent source of information. Upon recalling the sparkle in his eyes the day he met Ladybug, she knew precisely what needed to be done. She told Chat she would meet him in their usual spot at 8 p.m. to begin patrol. It was now 7 p.m., and Ladybug had already taken to the rooftops. Just a quick peek, she told herself. Chances were nothing would come of it, but as she approached the Agreste residence, she could clearly see a light on upstairs. It shone through the sprawling wall of glass she knew was part of Adrian's bedroom. She paused. She had seen into his room before while on patrol, but never when he was inside. Taking cover behind a chimney, she peered cautiously into the mansion. There he sat on his sofa, legs crossed. The television spat a dim, flickering glow on him. He seemed to be absorbed in whatever he was watching, and that gave her confidence enough to venture out from her hiding place. For a moment, all she could do was stand there, watching him and gnawing the inside of her lip. Her plan consisted of 2 pots. First, by pure chance, Ladybug would find herself across the Agreste mansion. Second, she would cheer up Adrian. It occurred to her only now that there was a gaping chasm between point A and point B. How was she going to get his attention? What was she going to do once she had it? From there, all the flaws in her plan came trickling down upon her. Creeping around on the rooftops opposite his bedroom? What was she thinking? Of course he wasn't going to be happy to see her. What a weird thing to do. Thinking better of it all, she stepped sharply backward and reached for her yo-yo. Adrian looked up from his television. Ladybug froze, focus unwavering. She thought she saw his eyes widen. Embarrassment surged in her chest. She had been seen. She swallowed past the lump in her throat and grabbed her yo-yo with trembling fingers, about to turn and run, when Adrian did something she had never anticipated. He waved to her. It was not a shy, polite wave, the likes of which had been given to Marionette on a few occasions. It was energetic enough to sway his whole body. Ladybug released her yo-yo. The searing heat in her chest receded in the wake of something light and airy, something that fluttered and danced within her like dozens of tiny butterflies. It occurred to her first that her cheeks ached, and second that she was grinning ear to ear. She waved back to him, matching every ounce of his enthusiasm. As she did, he leaped up from the couch, bounding past the coffee table and up to the wall of glass that separated them. He pressed his hands to the supports and beamed at her. While her confidence had recovered impressively from its fall, it was still a bit shaken, and the butterflies were not helping her think straight. So she did the only thing she could think to do. She kissed her fingertips and blew. Adrian's mouth popped open, and that was the last thing she saw before swinging away. That was how it started. As the weeks went by, Ladybug found herself more and more outside Adrian's window. At first, she dared not venture closer than the buildings across the street, but eventually she found it in her to zip past his bedroom and onto the roof. From there she dropped upside down until her nose was a hair's breadth away from the glass. Adrian sat cross-legged on his bed, staring at her in equal parts bemusement and wonder. At some point, the book he had been reading fell into his lap. She knew this because his hands were still poised as if holding something. He quickly tossed it aside and jumped to his feet, dashing to meet her at the window. He opened it and invited her inside. How could she say no to that face? For a long time, they sat together on his sofa, talking excitedly in hushed voices. He told her how much he admired her, and she said the same for him. He asked her what it was like to see Paris from the rooftops, and to swing from the Eiffel Tower. How exactly did she purify an Akuma? Just how many different functions did her yo-yo have? How did Lucky Charm work? "Oh, really?" he asked after listening to her explanation. "What's the weirdest thing it's ever given you?" Once he even asked her about Chat Noir. A few times she tried to get him to talk about his career, but he always seemed to steer the subject back to her. As they talked, he scooted closer to her. It was subtle, always a short distance, and always while she was looking out the windows or down at her feet. Perhaps he hoped she wouldn't notice. Of course she noticed. Only when the sun began to sink below the skyline did she realize how long the two of them had been talking. It would be dark soon, and her partner would be waiting for her. She was forced to bid a hasty retreat, but not before promising to meet him again the following weekend. Every Saturday night before patrol, she paid a visit to the Agreste mansion. These visits were far shorter than she would have liked, only an hour or so, but they were absolutely, unequivocally the best part of her week. It was not long before she heard Alia and Adrian chatting again. It was about her, of course. It surprised her for a moment. She thought it odd for Adrian to talk to Alia about something so personal. That is, until she saw how excited he was. The famously cool, composed Adrian Agreste was nearly tripping over his words as he recounted their time together last night. He needed to talk to someone, she supposed. And who better to listen to him go on about Ladybug than Alia Césaire, devoted administrator to the Lady Blog? Alia, of course, was supremely envious. She pulled Marionette into the seat next to her, quickly explaining what the two of them had been talking about before she stumbled in. Marionette certainly didn't need to feign interest as she leaned over the table between them, listening intently. "I need you to tell me everything," Alia said, "and I mean everything." He didn't. Adrian answered her questions in good spirits. He provided more than enough information to satisfy her, though she insisted she be the first to know whenever Ladybug came to visit again. There were, however, a few small details missing from his story. For example, the time Ladybug had taken in his hands, hoping to comfort him after talking a bit too long about his father. He neglected to mention that lately, when she climbed in through his window, he caught her as he hopped to the floor, his hands lingering on her waist a moment too long. Not a word was said about how she, in a moment of courage, had called him handsome, and certainly not about the subsequent giggles. His were embarrassed. Hers were out of guilty amusement upon seeing Adrian Agreste turn beet red. Moreover, and perhaps more importantly, he never mentioned what happened last night. As she was preparing to leave through the window, he called after her, asking her to wait. Ladybug turned sharply around, surprised, and her eyes seemed to root him to the spot. Her attention flitted briefly to his throat as he swallowed, nervous. Finally, he took another step forward, surprising her again when he wriggled his quivering fingers between hers. All the lights of Paris glinted in his eyes as he looked down upon her, the words on his tongue struggling to take shape. He asked to kiss her good night. She, of course, said yes. It was a soft, chaste kiss that was over far too quickly. Even so, the effect it had on her was like nothing she had ever experienced. Were it not for his hands in hers, she thought she may have fallen to her knees. She could tell from the look on his face that it had done the same to him. She wished she could tell someone. She wished she could tell everyone. Tiki was always content to listen to her go on, but that alone was hardly enough to satisfy her. Who else could she tell? Chat Noir? Oh, poor Chat might be heartbroken. Most of all, she wanted to tell Alia, imagining the look on her face broadened Marionette's knowing smile as the two of them walked side by side down the hall. Maybe someday, she thought. Someday, and maybe that day would come sooner rather than later. Alia would find out. She would find out about Ladybug and about Adrian, about all the things her horrible, traitorous best friend had been hiding from her all this time. Thinking about it now, with so many things to tell her, maybe that wouldn't be so bad. For now, though, she was content to look forward to next weekend. Anyways, this has been, She's Wonderful. Fanfic that I personally enjoyed, actually. I'm normally not, okay, I can't hide it. I'm shipping trash. I am. This was obviously a Miraculous Ladybug fanfic. I found it because a person was like, hey, read it, and I did, and it was good, so yeah, that's what's happening here. Anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Remember that if you did not like this video, please hit dislike, comment if you want, subscribe if you really want to, I mean, oh goodness, and if you liked it, well, there's a button for that too. Anyways, everyone have a wonderful day. Love y'all, and good night.